So far we have our player object that allows us to change our colour, and then we have some blocks that will start off with a random colour and fall towards our player. As we found in the last video, it would be very difficult to manually place every block, and we'd eventually run out, so the player would be left with nothing to do. Our solution to this is to create a new object, and we'll call it object_spawn. A spawn point in games is typically where certain objects are produced or created. This could be a player spawning after defeat, or a vending machine spawning drinks and snacks. Ours today is going to be used to create our blocks. Our object spawn won't require a sprite, as we don't actually need to see it in game. An object can still be placed inside of a room without a sprite and function just like we tell it to. We want this object to have a random chance of spawning or creating a new block, and we want the block to be able to fall anywhere within the width of the room and begin just above, so we don't see them popping in when they're created. To start this, we're going to add a step event. As you'll remember, a step event occurs every step or frame, so this will trigger 30 times a second by default. As usual, we're going to drag and drop our execute code action from the control tab into the list. We're going to begin with an if statement. In this statement, we want there to be a random chance of a block spawning. So, let's say we get GameMaker to choose a random number between 1 and 10. To do this, we'll type inside the brackets I random_range, which means GameMaker will choose a random whole number or integer, hence the I random, between two numbers we define. Open your bracket and you'll see at the information bar at the bottom it is asking for x1 and x2. Our first number will be 1, comma, and our second number will be 10. Close your bracket, and now this tells GameMaker to choose a number between those two values. Well, this won't quite be enough, as we need to define which numbers will trigger this if statement. For this example, I'm going to say if this random number between 1 and 10 is less than 2, we'll create a block. I need to use the less than sign, which is the small angled bracket pointing to the left, and simply type 2. This will essentially spawn a block every time GameMaker chooses 1, meaning there is a 10% chance that a block will spawn every step. Close the if statement and create your curly brackets so we can tell GameMaker what to do when this statement is true. So, we have a number less than 2, making this statement true. Well, what do we want it to do now? We're wanting to create an instance of the block object. This is a simple function called instance_create. Type it out and open a bracket as it's a function, and look down the bottom to see what information we need to provide. It says we need x, y, and the object we want to spawn. Well, the x and y is the position we want the block to spawn in. If we have a look at our room, the top left corner, in terms of positions, is 0, 0. The width, or horizontal axis, is x, and the height, or vertical axis, is y. We want our blocks to spawn somewhere within the x-axis, and just above the screen in terms of the y-axis. The x-axis will be most difficult, as we need to define a random position, but the y-axis can simply be set to -32, as our block is only 32 pixels wide in any direction, meaning it will appear off-screen and then fall down. So, back to our code for now. Our x value is going to make use of the random range function we used before, so let's start with I random_range and provide it two numbers to choose between. Now, we could go for 0 and 270, as this is the width of our room, but this means we will occasionally get blocks spawning halfway off the side of the screen. This doesn't look very polished, so we'll give ourselves a bit of breathing room and reduce the range GameMaker will choose from. Good values I've been working with are 16 and 256. These are simply half the width of the block smaller than the room width, so we shouldn't have an issue now. Close the brackets and insert a comma to separate our information. Our Y value, as we mentioned before, can simply be minus 32, so our blocks spawn 32 pixels above the screen. And our object is obviously going to be the object underscore block. That's what we want an instance of after all. Close the bracket and end the line with a semicolon to finish. Click the tick and save the changes, and save the object by clicking OK. Now, open up your sprite block. We're now going to have a look at using the origin values on our properties window. The origin of our sprite is the relation to its position in a room. We can adjust these values by typing in our X and Y position, and you'll see the two lines change in our sprite preview over on the right. We can also click and drag on the preview to position it by hand, and this will also alter the numbers in the boxes. Wherever that cross sits is where our object will be created from. So, in our example, when GameMaker chooses an X position, it will place the object sprite on that X and Y coordinate by the origin point. Imagine the sprite as a photo, and we've placed a pin through that photo. We'll say that's the origin point. If we were told to pin that photo onto a specific part of the wall, we would put the pin or origin point on that position, and the photo or sprite would be placed relative to that and sort of spill out from that point. Typically, it's very useful to set the origin to the exact center of our sprite. We're going to want that in this case. It's very easy to do, and you've probably already spotted how, but we simply click center. We know it's correct, as the preview shows in the middle, and our two values are both 16, which is half of 32. Click OK and save the sprite. Now, if we open our room and go to Objects, select the Object Spawn and place it anywhere inside the room. You'll notice it appears as a blue circle with a red question mark. This is simply GameMaker's way of showing where the object is if it doesn't have a sprite. Don't worry, this won't show up in game. You'll need to delete any of the blocks you put in before by holding Ctrl, Shift and right-clicking on them. Save the room and run the game to test it. We now have blocks randomly spawning and spreading out nicely across the room without clipping off the edge. Our issue now is that after a short time it becomes incredibly difficult, almost impossible, as there are large clusters of blocks at one time, and sometimes overlapping. This is the danger with purely random generation. We can't always control it. To solve this, we're going to put in a little bit of breathing room for our players between each spawn, and to do this we're going to make use of alarms. So, open up your object spawn and double click the execute code action we have already. Now, an alarm in GameMaker is pretty much a timer. We can set the timer to a certain value, and when it hits 0, something can happen. An alarm is its own event, and we're going to use it within this existing if statement to help us control the spawning of our blocks. Inside the if statement brackets, just after our number 2, we're going to write AND. This extends our if statement even further with another condition. So, when it runs, it will check if the first condition is true, and if the second is true, and only then will it complete the actions below. So, our second condition will be if the timer has run out. We're going to make use of alarm, square bracket, 0, square bracket. We use the square brackets so we can tell GameMaker which alarm or timer to use. We're then going to compare its value or ask if it's equal to -1. Notice we use the 2 equals sign again, as we're comparing values, not assigning one. It seems odd to use -1, as a timer typically hits 0. But in GameMaker, when the timer hits 0, it sets itself to -1 so it doesn't continually repeat itself. The last little bit of code for this part needs to go on a new line underneath our instance create. This line will reset the alarm to a value so it can count down again and give us that slight time in between each block. We set it similarly to checking it, and we start with alarm square bracket 0 square bracket. And as we're assigning it a value, we'll use a single equal sign and set it to 10, semicolon to finish. Alarms count down in steps, so setting it to 10 will mean it's 10 steps long, which is 1/3 of a second by default. If we want roughly a second gap between each block, we could set it to 30, or if we wanted 10 seconds gap, we'd set it to 300. For now, leave it at 10 and click the tick to finish. Last but not least, we need to actually add our alarm. Click Add Event, select Alarm, and select Alarm 0, as that's the one we named in our code. You could have named any one between 0 and 12, but as long as you choose the equivalent alarm event, everything will run just fine. Now, our alarm event is actually empty, as it has no actions. If an event is empty, GameMaker will ignore it completely, which is no help for us. There is a quick fix for this. We're going to drag an execute code action into the list, and we're going to leave a comment in the code. A comment is just as it sounds, a note or a comment in the code, so we can either remember what a particular line does, or make notes for other people to read. To start a comment line, use 2 forward slashes, and you'll notice it changes to green. This identifies comments in code. Write something simple, such as don't delete. This will help remind yourself. Click the tick to save. This means now GameMaker won't delete the alarm, meaning we can use it for our timer. Save the object by clicking OK, and test your game again. You should notice it's a lot smoother than before, and we can reliably continue our game without risk of a large clump of objects stopping our progress. Now, you can make the game easier or more difficult by increasing or decreasing the alarm time, respectively. Have a play and see what you find comfortable. Make sure you save your project, and in the next video we'll add in some scoring so we can see how successful we are as players.